Stargate Moments by Mark Spruce, written in 2026. Do you remember that classic scene in Jaws where Roy Schneider is sat on the beach as people frolic in the sea before him? He's worried about the possibility of another shark attack when suddenly his fears seem to be coming true. That moment of realization is captured by Spielberg's use of a camera effect called the dolly zoom. The background is pushed away, and at the same time his shocked face is brought forward to fill the screen. There's no dialogue, but we get an immediate sense of what is going through his mind. It was this scene that came to mind recently when I had an experience that in a millisecond took me back to another time. I hasten to add it wasn't a shark attack. On this occasion, it was hearing a song for the first time in decades. I happened to hear Terry Scott singing My Brother, or My Brother. Instantly, I was transported back in my mind to my childhood bedroom. It would have been a Saturday morning, and I would have been about 9 or 10 years old. I was most probably making an Airfix model at the time. A Messerschmitt, a Spitfire, or a tank of some sort, I should imagine. I know it would have been a Saturday morning, as that was when Ed Stewpot Stewart had his children's radio show. Terry Scott's novelty song was played regularly on the show, alongside others by the likes of Bernard Cribbins, Danny Kaye, Burl Ives and Peter Sellers. There was also that short sound clip of the cheeky lad saying, "Hello, darling." A friend of mine once said, "Music is a time machine," and he's absolutely right. A few lines of Terry Scott, and in a millisecond, pathways in my brain connected to a whole string of dormant memories. It was after that experience I started to think of how my other senses might produce the same effect. Another way of describing it might be the Stargate effect. Most people will know of the TV series or the film where a group of scientists, I use that word loosely, pass through a circular portal and are instantly transported to another time and place. Smell was the first sense that came to mind, and following the Terry Scott incident, the smell of Humbrol model paint took me back to a similar place and time. That incident happened in lockdown back in 2020, when for the first time in very many years, and in an effort to pass the hours, I made an Airfix model. One whiff of the unique smell of that paint and I was taken straight back again to my childhood bedroom on a Saturday morning. Another Stargate smell I experienced recently was that of a newborn baby. It was a smell that, unless you happen to work in a neonatal unit, you come across so rarely in your lifetime. Holding a 1-week-old baby and smelling the top of its head instantly took me back to being a new father myself some 30 years ago. A whole flood of dormant memories washed over me in that moment, of the joy and worries of becoming a first-time parent. It was a very powerful experience. Driving through the remote Lincolnshire Fens last year, I caught the unmistakable smell of an industrial pig breeding unit. One smell never forgotten. I worked on one as a student back in 1979. That was an odour portal I really did not need to go through again. Moving on from sound and smell, taste is another sense that can provide a Stargate moment. For me, it happened a few years ago when, of all things, on a whim, I fancied trying a corned beef and tomato sandwich on thick white bread. It must have been decades since I had eaten one, but the moment I bit into that sandwich and those tastes hit my tongue, wham! I had another instant transporting experience. I was about 6 or 7 years old, sat on the beach with my sister and my parents at Sandbanks near Poole in Dorset. The sandwich was wrapped in greaseproof paper and the sun shone down from a clear blue sky. Surrounding me were the sounds of people playing on the beach and in the sea. I was sat on a beach towel and a gusty onshore breeze blew fine grains of sand onto my sandwich. The texture of the soft, compressed meat and tomato in my mouth was annoyingly interrupted as my teeth bit down on occasional hard grains of sand. They were all memories and images I thought I had completely forgotten, but which were evidently still there in the recesses of my brain. They just took a long-forgotten taste experience to bring them back. In 2025, my wife and I had a short break, staying at a friend's flat in Ostend, Belgium. My wife had been to Ostend once before as a 14-year-old on holiday with her father. She had a photograph of herself from that time, standing on a narrow street facing directly towards the camera. Behind the houses and dominating the skyline behind her was a tall, imposing and somewhat incongruous tower block. We walked around the narrow streets of the old town, trying to line up the view and angle of the tower to find exactly where the photo had been taken. Eventually, we found the right street and the location. However, it wasn't the view behind her that produced the Stargate moment. For her, it was the view behind where her father, the photographer, had been standing. It was the actual hotel they had stayed in all those decades ago. In an instant she recognised it and started to recount a whole stream of memories related to that holiday. She could even remember and point out the second-floor hotel window of the room in which they stayed. Sight was the transporting sense on that occasion. The last sense to consider is touch. The portal moment for this sense occurred for me a few months ago when I was out for a country walk somewhere in Nottinghamshire. Walking up a lane between fields, I passed one containing a variety of horses and ponies. I stopped briefly by the barbed wire fence, and one large bay-coloured horse of about 16 hands lifted its head from grazing and quickly took the few steps over to where I was standing. It leant over the fence right in front of me, and I reached out to stroke its head. I could feel the bones of its skull under the thin layer of skin below its forelock. I felt the warm softness of its nostrils as it nuzzled into my open hand. I ran my hand along its neck and I could feel the strong muscles and sinews running down towards its leg. Lastly, I felt the coarse hairs of its mane, clogged in places with clumps of hard mud and in need of a good curry comb to brush them out. I was 14 again. I was getting my mother's ponies ready for yet another Saturday morning ride. Collected from the field at the back of our house, I would put their head collars on and walk them around to the place where their leading reins were tied up to the railings. After brushing them down all over with a dandy brush, I would then lift each hoof to clean out mud and stones from the frog with a metal hoof pick. Next, I would put on the saddle and reach under the horse to gather up the girth and tighten it securely. Some horses did not mind this procedure. Others resented it and would whip their heads around to try and bite me to express their annoyance. Once the saddles were on, I would give the placid ones a polo. The aggressive ones just got a mouthful of expletives. Missy, Pedro, Belle, Sailor, Starlight and Bobby. All their names came back to me. The last task was putting on the bridle. I'd feed the metal bit into the pony's mouth and then lift the bridle onto the head, pulling their ears through to rest behind the headband. I would then pull the forelock up to rest over the headband and lastly secure the chin strap. The last time I completed that procedure, I was probably in my early 20s, but the feel of stroking that horse brought it all back for me as clear as yesterday. So, there you go. Our senses as stargates or dolly zooms. These are just a few personal examples I could think of. I'm sure with a bit of reflection you can think of your own. Spruce Casts, an eclectic collection of anecdotes, reflections and stories by Mark Spruce.